It's an honor to present with my two mentors in the room, Zach and Pete. In 1997 or so, do you remember? Machine learning was hard. It was hard. We probably spent 6 months figuring out that a giraffe was a mammal. Well, now what I could say, based on the two speakers you've heard, is machine learning is easy. It's just data is hard. And getting curated data and unbiased data is difficult. And I'd like to just tell you two stories in the 5 minutes that I have. So let me introduce you to Pooja. This is Pooja Kumari. I was in Bihar in northern India 2 weeks ago. Pooja was diagnosed improperly and treated with expensive, unnecessary testing. What was her issue? You see her young child there. She was recently pregnant. Postpartum, she developed abdominal pain. So Zach, postpartum abdominal pain, what would come to mind? Oh, something structural, something infectious. She had abdominal tuberculosis. No, but so let me ask the question to the physicians in the room. How many times in the United States has the differential included abdominal tuberculosis or even extrapulmonary TB in general? The answer is it's just not in our differential. So she went from doctor to doctor to doctor, losing her life savings, getting misdiagnosis and ineffective treatment, ultimately losing her land and losing her cow. I guess good end of the story is the Gates team came back to the United States, ran a GoFundMe. We bought her cow back. So she is going to have, we hope, a good medical outcome and a good social outcome. But all of this happened because, to the points you folks have made, no one really considered in Bihar in January 2019 in a 25-year-old female that abdominal TB should be in the differential diagnosis. But yet in India, there are 1.3 billion people and 1.3 million active cases of tuberculosis, 60% of which are extrapulmonary. So for that setting, in those signs and symptoms, it absolutely should be considered in a differential. Let me give you another example, and this I'm going to choose from rural United States. Bakersfield, California. Ever been? Okay, so as physicians, many of us get called into peculiar consultations. Here was mine. And by the way, this is not going to disclose anything that is HIPAA identifiable. So a colleague calls and says, my 24-year-old daughter was just arrested in Bakersfield, California for running naked through a Walmart parking lot at 3 in the morning. The emergency physician evaluated her. Could you call the emergency physician? And I did. He said, do you know what we found? Her urine was positive for cannabis. And of course, all of us in this room know that cannabis consumption results in 24-year-old women running naked through parking lots at 3 in the morning. Never. And he discharged her from the hospital having found this positive tox screen for cannabis. We flew her to Logan, brought her to Beth Israel Deaconess, did a CTLP. Her lumbar puncture showed 9,000 white cells and 0 RBCs, worst case of meningitis any of us had ever seen. And again, thinking back about AI, if we had the benefit of 1 million young women with altered mental status, how many would include cannabis as the primary cause? Probably, again, none. But in a person who lives with a lot of other 20-year-olds who have lots of infectious diseases, what is the chance of meningitis? Actually pretty significant in the differential diagnosis. So after she recovered, I asked, what was the story with this cannabis? She said, I had this photophobia, this horrible headache, and it was the only medication that my roommate had handy. Right? So I tell you this again because the promise of AI in 2019, where the technology is easy, is that the patients of the past can inform the patient care of the future. And these are just two mistreatment examples that could have easily been redirected appropriately with AI techniques. But again, there are problems. The data is hard. Gathering and curating good quality data, unbiased data, and using it to train these algorithms is still a challenge. For those of us who work in healthcare institutions, you probably know the quality of our data is horrible. We get Social Security number wrong 11% of the time. We even get gender wrong 3% of the time. Admittedly, a fluid concept, but it's just because it's a binary or often field that's miskeyed into the data. Men have babies, women have prostatectomies. We need to work on curated data sets if we're going to be successful with AI. Part of the way we can gather this data, especially in resource-poor settings, is increased use of mobile technology. Spent some time in South Africa last year where Medic Mobile, who I think may be represented here, gathers data by community health workers into databases that can be curated for this purpose. So increasingly, you may not have cloud computing, but you have inexpensive Android devices capable of gathering reasonable quality data and then using it for machine learning. And final thing, which you already mentioned, is we have to be so careful as we gather these data sets that we protect privacy and security, because, maybe Pete could comment on this, I'm not sure there is anything such as de-identified data. And so if we're going to aggregate this and then share it with the world, we have to be extraordinarily careful and cautious. And last cautionary note, last year I was asked, maybe we should create an immunization database for the world. We'll just use Facebook to host it. Maybe in 2019, that doesn't sound so good anymore. Well, thanks so much. Happy to answer any questions. See, 5 minutes, very short, yes.
John, for the live stream.
Well, point well made. So in the case of Bihar, where would you get the right data?
World Health Partners is an NGO in Bihar doing some remarkable work. And here's the model. Imagine that in every small village we find an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur may have a high school education. That entrepreneur is given the following deal. We're going to give you a telemedicine or mobile connection to experts, and you will be allowed to charge $1, roughly, for your telemedicine facilitation business. And suddenly, each village now actually has a person who is regarded as not a doctor, but a clinician facilitator who gathers data and then brings telemedicine consultation to the village. So while I was in Bihar, for example, in this literally a hut, he had a Bluetooth low-energy blood pressure cuff, a pulse oximeter, and was able to gather structured and unstructured data in what I'll call an EHR Lite. Kind of the same sort of thing that Mobile Medic did. 5, 10 data elements that were of reasonably good quality that would then be centrally located in the World Health Partners database for analysis. That's an interesting model to scale. Other questions? Yes?
Could you just comment a little bit more on that? How much data is enough to start with? You said 5, 10 elements. Can you?
Well, and of course, I think our panelists here will have this discussion. It depends on the problem to be solved. Data, in my view, as a CIO for 23 years, is expensive. The curation of data to ensure its accuracy and usability gets harder and harder with each data element you add. So what I have seen in some of these resource-poor settings is if you give a good UI, a good user experience that helps you get the data right to begin with, and you gather 5 or 10 elements with great integrity, that's probably better than gathering 100 with poor integrity. So I would always try to get us the right data for the right purpose with the right experience, data we can trust rather than more data so far. Well, great. Well, thanks so much.